Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Tuesday, April 23rd. Also a great pleasure and honor to be joined today by Secretary of State Sarah Copeland Hanzas, who is with us today, coming in via Zoom from Montpelier. And our topic today is ranked choice voting. It's a subject I'm sure many of you have probably already heard a little bit about, but if you're like me, you may have somewhat of a cloudy understanding of exactly what that's involved, and it hasn't been used very much in Vermont, but it may be something we'll be hearing more about in the near future. Coming up first on Wednesday, May 1st, and then on Wednesday, May 8th, Secretary of State Copeland Hanzas is going to be doing some Zoom conversations in conjunction with the League of Women Voters of Vermont, talking about ranked choice voting. Those forums will be held from 7 to 8:30 p.m., and we'll mention them again just before when we close. But Secretary of State Hanzas, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Always a pleasure to have you back here on one of our shows, and they're always interesting. And I find the subject of ranked choice voting very intriguing. It's a different way of going about the sort of winner-take-all formula that we've tended to have here most of the time. So I wanted just to kind of get us started, if you could just sort of walk us through what is ranked choice voting and how does it work?
So ranked choice voting is a voting method that allows you to, as the name implies, rank your preference of your candidates. Instead of choosing only one that you want to support, you would get to rank all of the candidates who are on that particular ballot. So in the example that we have been talking about, because we will be advocating for ranked choice voting for the presidential primary in 2028, if you think about your ballot this year, both major parties had 5 candidates on their ballot. So instead of choosing just your one favorite candidate and that's done, and if your favorite candidate doesn't happen to have the momentum or the support, then your vote is not in support of the person who ultimately wins. Ranked choice voting would allow you to say, hey, I like this person first, and if they don't win, then I like this person, and this person in that order. And in that way, it really invites voters to be able to vote who they are passionate about and who they think would be best at the job. And it also allows them to have a second place or third place or fourth place even vote in the event that their favorite candidate is not the prevailing candidate in the first round of voting. And so that tabulation happens fairly automatically in the background. Our tabulator machines in Vermont are capable of doing that calculation so that we can ensure that the person who wins that presidential primary is the person who had support from a majority of Vermonters, either in that first round or in that second round, or maybe even a third round, depending on how equally the candidates rank. And, as you can imagine, if you have 3 very equal candidates, they might each get roughly a third of the vote. But in order to find out who Vermonters really think would be the best selection in that case, we might like to see, well, who's everybody's second choice? And does that push someone over that 50% mark?
So I'm just wondering if it sounds like this is a system that works when there's more than 2 candidates involved or opposing to each other. And how are the second and third choice votes counted the same as the first? I mean, does this kick in only when one candidate has less than 51% of the vote totals?
Exactly. 50% plus 1 vote.
Right.
And so and so you can imagine in a 2-way race that it's going to be fairly easy if everybody casts a vote in that election, fairly easy for one of those 2 candidates to get over 50%. But in the example of 3 or 4 or 5 candidates or more, it makes it harder to get past that 50% plus one threshold. And so what you do then is you take everybody's second place tally and say, does that push somebody up over the 50% plus one mark? And so when we dive into this in our May 1st informational meeting, you'll get a chance to see exactly how that works, and we will have a sample vote that participants can take, and we'll be able to watch how that works to figure out who is the ultimate winner of a particular election.
So this would not be something that would start until 2028, I think, right? It wouldn't apply this year. I mean, is the legislative groundwork in place for all of that, or does there have to be some statutory bills that get through the legislature before it can be done, or can your office simply say, "This is what we should be doing"?
So this will require a change in Vermont law, and we've been talking about this change for a couple of years. When I was serving in the legislature, the proposal had come before the legislature, and so we expect that next year the legislature will again consider moving a ranked choice voting bill, and our office will advocate that that apply to the 2028 presidential primary. And that may seem like it's a long way off, but there is actually a lot of work that we need to do with our town and city clerks to fully understand how we can make it work for them, as well as some of the nuts and bolts of how we do a rank choice tabulation for those very many communities who don't have those tabulators, right? You're not going to sit down and do a hand count of a ranked choice ballot and tabulate that by hand. Those will all need to come into a central location. So there will be work done in advance of moving this forward that will help clerks in different size communities discuss ways that it will work better for them. And then we will also need to do a fair amount of education of Vermonters, because we're used to seeing election results, sometimes as soon as 20 to 30 minutes after the polls close on election night. And in the case of ranked choice voting, if we need to transport ballots into a central location in order to be able to run them through a tabulator, those results will likely not be available on election night. So those are some of the details that we will work out with clerks, and then we will want to educate the electorate and the press about what to expect, so that people know that there's nothing going on here. It's just that it takes time to drive ballots from Pownell to wherever we decide to go from small communities into a central tabulator.
So keep the conspiracy theories on hold for a little while, in other words.
Yes.
I guess I just wondered why limit it to the presidential primary? Why couldn't it be sort of for, let's say, a Senate race or Congress, or for that matter, a select board race at the local level? Would that just get too complicated too quickly, and you want to ease it in a little bit?
Well, one really important reason you alluded to earlier, and that is that ranked choice voting is really more powerful when you have more than two candidates. And in so many cases, in a lot of the what we call down ballot races, because they're further down, really often only have two candidates. And so we don't want to introduce ranked choice voting and confuse all of those races. I think it's better to start with the presidential primary in March, where we always have more than two candidates. Sometimes we have as many as 6 or 7 or 10, depending on how many people are ramping up to make their run for the presidency. and let Vermonters understand how it works and how to use it, and also give the local election officials the opportunity to iron out those kinks before we try to use it in other races. And if Vermonters like it, and if Vermonters believe that it empowers them to vote their conscience and their values without having to sort of triangulate off of who appears to have the ability to win, then Vermonters may advocate for us to expand it to other elections. But I'd like to start with the 2028 presidential primary so that we can have a good, positive outcome and strong out of the gate when we do this for the first time.
But then it wouldn't apply then to the 2028 presidential election, I assume, because there would be, I assume, minor party candidates like we're seeing this year. We're seeing third and fourth, and I think even fifth or sixth party candidates involved. So
if this would just apply to the presidential primary. That's correct. Okay. The March election.
Okay. I guess, has it ever been used before in Vermont? I seem to recall Burlington has experimented with it, but I'm not sure of that.
Yes, Burlington used it a decade or so ago in their mayoral race. And then 3 or 4 years ago, they brought it back. They had discontinued it because folks were unhappy with the way it worked in Burlington. They brought it back for their city council races, and then more recently also expanded it to their mayoral race. So Burlington has some good experience with ranked choice voting. And over the coming years, we will have the chance to see how that works in Burlington races.
The only other state in New England, I think, that uses it is Maine, and I think that's in their presidential primaries there too, if I'm not mistaken.
And we have some important lessons that we can learn from Maine because unlike other jurisdictions, cities or counties that might use ranked choice voting, Maine has a very dispersed election oversight as well. So they have city and town clerks who administer elections on the local level. And they've had to work through some of the very same concerns that I mentioned we'll need to work through when we move to ranked choice voting for the 2028 primary. And so we will look to them to see how they solved some of the challenges of how you transport ballots. And we'll also look to them to say, what did you learn about how you set expectations with the media on when results will be available? How did you reach out to your voters so that voters understood how to correctly fill out a ballot? The ballots, if you've seen them, really are fairly straightforward. But it is something different, and so we'll want to make sure that there's adequate information both in advance of the 2028 primary, but also at the polling place, so that anybody who might be just crawling out from underneath wherever they've been hiding will be able to have clear instructions on how to participate in that primary.
Because I assume voters wouldn't necessarily have to indicate a second, third, or fourth choice. They might just want to check off the one candidate that they are supportive of and leave it there.
It's true.
Yes. So I'm just thinking here, what do you see as the main advantage or benefit for this? I mean, is there something beyond giving voters maybe a little more choice about who they would like to indicate preferences for, that sort of makes ranked choice voting a good idea to adopt at this point in time? Or what's the main benefit that you see?
Yeah, I think that the benefit that I see is in really giving Vermonters the ability to choose the person whose values and vision most closely match. And it's hard to do that in some races when you look at perhaps the money advantage or the endorsement advantage that some, high profile candidate has, but then you look at another candidate and you say, but this person really follows what I believe should happen. And And then the voter is left with, well, if I vote for this person who doesn't have the money or the name recognition, then am I just wasting my vote? And that's a terrible choice to have to make. So ranked choice voting allows people to still participate and perhaps have sway over what happens in the particular race without feeling like they aren't able to express their interest in maybe somebody who doesn't have the fundraising advantage. I've heard other descriptions of ranked choice voting also refer to the conduct of candidates. And so we don't see a whole lot of direct campaigning for presidential candidates in Vermont, right? Most of them come to New Hampshire because New Hampshire has the first in the nation primary. But in theory, if you as a candidate were hoping to encourage people who maybe like the other person better to put you as their number two, then you might not want to campaign as negatively or as aggressively against one of your opponents as you otherwise might be inclined to. When it's, a one and done vote, all you have to do is convince people that the other person is evil and hope that you get their vote. And that, I know that you and I have talked about this before, that leads to some negative campaigning, and I think from my perspective, it leads to some voter fatigue and disenchantment with the whole process because people resort to name calling of their opponents instead of just talking about what they want to do and what their vision is. So we could hope that with broader adoption of ranked choice voting, that we might bring a little bit of civility into that process.
Well, that would certainly be a welcome change. I'm definitely ready for that. I just wondered though, what about election security? I mean, we hear so much about vote counting and whatnot lately. Um, does this open the door to some question about whether or not votes are being accurately counted? I mean, in addition to the training that the town clerks or the election officials will have to undergo, I'm just wondering, does this make that sort of allegation a little more credible in some way?
I don't think so, but it's part of the reason why we are taking the careful onboarding approach, where we identify what will need to change about election procedure, and then think very carefully and collaboratively with our local election officials about how to make that change. There's also, as we talked about before, just the perception of something going on in the case of ranked choice voting, because the results might be slower to achieve than with a normal first past the post. But I think the important thing for all Vermonters to recognize is that we audit elections afterward because we have a paper ballot that corresponds to every Vermonter's vote. And so we can always go back and look to confirm that the election results that were reported are indeed what the ballots said. And so in that way, we always have the ability to go back and double check, how do we do? And the reality, as we've seen so far in Vermont, is that our election results are very very safe, very secure, very accurate, and they are consistent between the election time reporting and the audit that we do after the general election. And so I feel very confident that our tabulators are accurate, that that the results are being reported correctly. And it's part of what we will absolutely build into election procedures when we craft the ranked choice vote bill for the 2028 presidential primary.
So this will have to be a bill that the legislature will enact sometime, I guess starting next year, or I guess they'll begin working on it. I think they'll probably run out of time for this session to do that. But do you anticipate there'll be any pushback from the legislature on this? Like, why are we bothering to do this? Everything seems to be working fine as it is. Why do we want to change it all around, even at the presidential primary level? and limiting it to that as opposed to state races. Do you think they'll be receptive?
I think and hope that the legislature will be receptive to this. I think that what they'll see from our office is that we are taking a very methodical and careful approach to this, that we're not rushing to, to grab onto the next bright, shiny object, but that we are saying, let's do this in a controlled manner for an election that we know will have more than two candidates. And let's see how it works. And in that way, I am inviting the legislature to, to join with us and move the bill forward next year.
Why do you think it hasn't been tried, not just here in Vermont, but in most of the country before? I mean, it sounds like this is a much better approach than the winner take all, first past the post kind of way we've been doing things since 1792 or whenever.
Well, gee, Andrew, how much time do you have?
Well, I think we got about another 8 minutes.
Well, we could take all of that and more to talk about the complexities of making changes to election law and why there are often significant headwinds. And the reality is it's hard to get consensus across different states, across different political philosophies, and in that way, individual states are becoming these laboratories of democracy. And those of us who have adopted universal vote by mail, for instance, tend to see stronger participation when we make it easier for people to vote. And it's my hope that if ranked choice vote is an option that Vermonters like, and they think that it empowers their election, that other states might come along and do the same thing.
One of the interesting aspects of this I learned about in preparation for this conversation was that I guess there's two states where it impacts the presidential voting now, Maine being one, and I think Iowa is the other one, where the votes in, and I may be confusing Iowa with Nebraska, but where the electoral votes, this is at a presidential election, so it wouldn't really apply to what we're looking at coming here. But Maine has two electoral votes. Vermont, of course, only has, Maine has four electoral votes. We have three. But if the votes in one of the congressional districts favor candidate X and the other one favors candidate Y, then Maine's four electoral votes get divided accordingly. And so I'm thinking, gee, at some point maybe Vermont's population will grow to the point where we'll have four electoral votes as opposed to three that we have at the moment. And that would be kind of interesting if, let's say, the two districts voted differently for the different candidates and divided the electoral vote accordingly. I think it would be kind of interesting if that were to be the case that then happened throughout the entire country. That would certainly make that whole swing state equation a little bit different from what it is at the moment.
Yes, and the other thing that could make the presidential election different is this idea of national popular vote. And that is a movement that is inviting states to commit to sending their electors to the candidate who wins the national popular vote. In that way, sort of doing an end run around the Electoral College, which is part of the reason why we have this concept of swing state, because you could narrowly win a bunch of smaller states and lose big time in, say, California or New York or another very populous state. And you could actually, in fact, several have actually won the presidency without having a majority of the national popular vote. And so it's a fascinating movement, and one that we should talk about again in the future. But Vermont has declared its intention to move to national popular vote once the requisite number of states to make it actually influence the electoral process have been adopted. So that's something on the horizon to look for in the general election for president.
Wow, that would be very interesting. We could definitely have a long conversation about all of that for sure, no question. But before we have to run here, I just wanted to ask you if you could kind of tell us a little bit about what will be sort of the central focuses of the 2 Zoom calls you'll be doing, the first one on May 1st and the second one on May 8th. Are there going to be different things you're going to concentrate on in each one?
Absolutely. So the first week, I want to bring in a national expert on ranked choice voting who can really explain, what is ranked choice voting, where has it been used, how does it work, and will lead us through a sample ranked choice vote election. And in that, we will be able to put a link in the webinar that we're doing that evening to allow people to vote as we're even in the Zoom session. And we'll be able to see who wins in this theoretical 2028 presidential primary. So that'll be May 1st. And May 8th, we will actually have a couple of municipal clerks come in, and we'll unpack some of the questions, some of the concerns, some of the problem areas that we'll need to figure out before we can move to a ranked choice statewide for the 2028 presidential primary. And those clerks will come from a couple of different perspectives, because we will have the Burlington City Assistant Clerk, who is in charge of elections for Burlington, and she will have administered several ranked choice vote elections at that point. And then we'll also have the Brattleboro town clerk who while Brattleboro doesn't have ranked choice voting, lived in Maine before. And so she has some experience with ranked choice voting. She's seen how it works, and both of them will be able to have a robust conversation about how we move in that direction and what else needs to change about our elections procedures in order to move to ranked choice vote.
So I'm assuming the Zoom invite or address will be posted on your department's website. Would that be where people would go to find it?
Yes,
to
and I
log
would
in?
love for us to get you the registration link, and maybe you can share it in your post-production on this little segment.
Sure, be happy to. I think it's an important conversation. And the whole idea, I think, is a lot to offer us for sure. Well, okay. This is that's an interesting thought. Well, I want to thank you for your time and for walking us through this. We'll certainly want to tune in then on both those Zoom sessions there on May 1st and May 8th. Both of them start at 7 p.m. and go till about 8:30, and learn more about it.
Great. Well, I'm so happy to have had a chance to talk with you today, and I'm sorry that I missed the chance to come down and do this in person. You can see that I'm here in my office. But next time I'll be down into the Shire to visit with you in person.
Awesome. Well, that'd be great. We'll look forward to that. Well, thank you again for your time, Secretary of State Copeland Hanzas. Really appreciate it. Always a pleasure to chat with you about these and whatever issues are coming along. So we'll see you down here in the near future then at some point.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks. Thanks to all of you who've been with us today. I hope you found the program interesting. I know I certainly did. And it might be worth your time to put those 2 dates on your calendar. May 1st to May 8th, 7 p.m., Zoom calls on ranked choice voting. Meanwhile, take care. Thank you very much.